Now, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Reactive Land. Today we're gonna discuss R2DBC. So, one of the parts of the application stacks that have some I/O involved is, of course, talking and communicating with databases of any type, and that's because the database is usually our network, accessed our network, or it's accessed on another process, but it's still I/O. So as usual, we don't want our I/O operations to be blocking, and we prefer them to be asynchronous and non-blocking. So yeah, today we're gonna talk about how to write code in a reactive way that communicates with a relational database. And the trick with databases is that we use drivers to communicate with databases, and the drivers should support reactive operations, basically. And relational databases are used very commonly all over the industry, all over the place. But it's funny that their reactive the drivers came out last. Mongo and NoSQL, MongoDB, for example, or other NoSQL databases got their drivers much faster and much earlier at the stages that were reactive programming becoming famous. But nevertheless, today we're gonna talk about R2DBC, which is the framework and library that is available in Spring, and you can use that to communicate with your relational databases and have reactive operations on them. So as usual, we have a quick comparison between the classic blocking word with the non-blocking word. JDBC was the common way of communicating with relational databases in Java. It's still very valid, but we have R2DBC as well as the reactive way. In the JDBC style, you have in the Spring stack, of course, you have a CRUD repository, and then you just use that to, let's say, save something. And it just give it the object directly, and you get some object right away. So there's no reactive style stuff around as you expect. In R2DBC, you have something, actually, this API is kind of new. You have entity operations, and you, for example, insert something and then you get a mono back. The mono will eventually contain what you have saved. Or you can use reactive CRUD repository. It's also returns a reactive type. Or you have R2DBC entity template. This is like the template that we had in JDBC, but in a reactive way. So these are kind of some of the examples of how it works. In terms of dependencies, if you use Spring Boot, you will use this dependency, Spring Boot starter data R2DBC. Before it was JPA here, if you wanted to use JDBC, but here is R2DBC, it's reactive. And of course, you need the database driver as well. The driver for each database management system is different. Here we are looking at the example for Postgres, so you need this as well. And yeah, of course, this is not blocking. This is a non-blocking driver. And yeah, that's in terms of dependencies. When you want to initialize R2DBC in your Spring Boot project, you need something like this. It's kind of similar like creating your data source in JDBC. You just need to give it the connection string, username, and password. And yeah, of course, you have to have the dependencies on the class bus as well. So yeah, if you do these two steps, then you will have the APIs that I mentioned above available. So you can inject them whenever you want. So yeah, then you inject them, and here you are ready to go. So whatever we did in the JPA world with JPA repositories, you can do the same with R2DBC reactive repositories. So you already know all the APIs and interfaces. I don't need to say much. There is a difference here. There's a difference that, of course, the API is now return reactive types, and there's another difference, and I haven't totally understood what's going on there, but when you do like repository.save, like you have a repository of a type and then you want to save one of the objects of that type, if the object is new and you want to actually do an insert, that's problematic if you have a value for the ID or ID in the object. If you have set your ID field as null and you have a value or ID generator configured, that should be fine. Otherwise, it doesn't, the repository doesn't know if you are trying to save, update, insert it. It's because you only have a save API. It tries to understand if it's new or if it's a update itself, and it gets confused. So there is another interface called persistable. If you implement it with your entity, this problem will go away. Otherwise, you can use another API other than CRUD repository for insert. So insert with CRUD repository is a special case, and it has been brought up on GitHub on the repositories, and apparently it will be this way. It's part of some policies or some strategy. I didn't totally get it, but that doesn't really matter at this point in this context. You just need to know that with inserting an object using CRUD repository, using reactive CRUD repository is a little of a different case. So yeah, with that said, we can actually start just working with the challenges that we have. So please go ahead, share. And
can I just ask you about the last thing you said there, that
yeah, sure.
if you so the same thing on the normal CRUD repositories, that, or the JPA CRUD repositories, that has this ID problem. So you shouldn't set ID, it will generate an ID for you, right?
Yeah.
But does it work the same way with the reactive CRUD repository, and insert is only a problem if you have an ID, or
yeah, exactly,
is it always a problem with insert?
It's exactly the same as JPA, because
okay,
yeah, the problem that you mentioned with JPA is the same here. So if you have an ID and it's like, it doesn't know if it's new or if it's like update, so it tries to update it, and your database says that, oh, there is nothing to update. So yeah, exactly, you are right. It's exactly, and I think the reason that they don't solve it here is to basically keep it as similar as possible to JPA repositories.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Please share, one of you.